Alright, I'm going to do another video on this. This is an abstracted title. It'd be nice to get one for the property at issue, but this was 1957 that this was done. But it's about 190 pages. Shows everything in here on this one piece, but the importance of this is that this land was granted under the same way, except September 28th, 1850, which was the beginning congressional grant. I'm going to try to do this so you can pause on the pertinent pages. Okay, so after that, with September 28th, we're going to grant you these lands, but certain lands have to be used for railroad purposes. So it was the job of the state of Florida to come up with this stuff that was incorporating the railroads and stuff. So then they came up with the legislature, January 6th of 1855, being Chapter 610 Acts of 1855, now sections whatever these general statutes 90, vested title all lands to the state under the Swampland Land Act, and the trustees of the Internal Improvement Fund of the state of Florida being the government members from that. So there would be an act after this, the Congressional Act of 1856. So this goes into the creation of St. Lucie, Florida. Now, Pasco County wasn't created until June 2nd, 1887. It was cut out of Hernando County. Okay. Now, these weren't lands granted to the government. These were lands granted to the railroad specifically for those purposes, and that's what's going to be. We as third-party beneficiaries are entitled to enforce that. But this goes in Chapter 56 of the county. This is going to show the section of land. So, in patent number 3, Tampa District, bearing date of April 15th, 1856. Now, it's funny that they don't have a copy of that patent. See, that's one thing that we do have. I have a copy of patent number 32 for the Tampa District, but it's a swampland patent. So even back then, they didn't have, all the details. But the following lands described were patented to the state of Florida by the United States of America under the Act of Congress, September 28, 1855, following the patents bearing the following dates to wit. So these are grants en presente, meaning once we fulfill the terms of the grant, which was laying the railroad, we were promised 10,000 miles. This would be the capital stock of the railroad corporation, which is forever exempt from taxation. It literally is the sovereignty that the railroad was granted. This is their land. Florida was granted their even number sections. We were granted the odd number sections. So this is where the Vose Injunction comes in, because they originally started the Florida Railroad Company, which was a guy, Francis Vose, I guess, was the funder, but the guy behind that was the first governor, which was David Yulee or David Levi. He was his family were the Sephardi Jews that were expelled from Spain, so they were living in the Bahamas, and so he came over in the 1800s and drummed up this thing to get all the lands granted to the railroad. So he took up funding. He had bonds just like we had bonds, except the Florida Railroad wasn't able to fulfill the terms of laying the railroad, so it went defunct. And so this guy that had given all this money, Francis Vose, had to file a suit, an injunction, because they started selling all these lands. These lands were promised um, to secure the bonds held by Francis Vose. And this goes into here again. The suit arises of certain transactions. Um, I'll just kind of pause it here and you can read that. The state of Florida under Chapter 610, which is what they're in violation of. These lands are to be used, applied exclusively for those purposes and no other purposes whatsoever. Um, and the general object of the scope of the act are stated in Florida versus Anderson. That's going to be an important case to look up here. So it goes in that Francis Vose brought this suit in equity in the Circuit Court, United States, blah, blah, blah. The object of the suit was to obtain an injunction and decree protecting the Internal Improvement Fund against waste and misappropriation, which is exactly what's going on right now, by the trustees to the injury of Vose and others who held unpaid bonds in the Florida Railroad Company in conformity with the Act of 1855. Okay, so he had the unpaid bonds, and the state of Florida, the bill charged that the trustees had violated the law of their trust by misappropriating money received by them, leaving unpaid past due coupons, by neglecting to collect the amount due the seeking fund created by the Act of 1855, and illegally conveying millions of acres of land to corporations that had no right to receive them. And this is exactly what's going on now. They have no right to receive them. And that unless restrained, they would continue to waste and misapply to the irreparable injury of plaintiff Vose and others the fund trusted to them for the use and purposes indicated in the Act. And this is exactly the principles that we're going to be implementing. Among other allegations in the bill is that one effect on the 28th day of July, 1868, that the trustees, by resolution of the date, attempted to secure to the said Southern Inland Navigation Improvement Company 40,000 acres or whereabouts of the said trust lands, and that about the first day of the March 1870 they entered into an agreement, blah, 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 blah. So I'm just gonna, you can pause it, take a look at that, and then the next page. Hopefully this will be, you guys can read it. But anyways, the way that these notes and bonds are, they're surrendered and canceled is the terminology used. My bonds and my receiver's notes have not been canceled, have not been surrendered nor canceled. And I could go in with on about Henry Flagler and his bunch. There's something in here about, it mentions Henry Flagler as of 1892, because Henry Flagler's the stock core resolution. Henry Flagler, I think, became the controlling director of all of this property. He was killed off when the first set of bonds became due in 1913. Then 3 months later, his second in charge, J.R. Parrott, which is mentioned in here too, was killed off. And then his wife was finally killed off a few years later, and they finally did an investigation. The suspicious death of Henry Flagler's wife is what it was all about. Um, but this isn't yeah, this is what the state of Florida has been doing. They don't care. They just will sell land that's not theirs. Um, Lands covered by these contracts was question the collateral proceedings. Um, anyway, so Vose won the suit, and they couldn't sell any of these lands. He put an injunction of all the lands in the state of Florida, at least the ones covered under the Swampland Act of September 28th, 1850. Um, and I think that's pretty much what we're going to have to do. Because title, it's well settled that title doesn't pass until all interest holders are paid in full, and that hasn't happened. I've got the evidence that that hasn't happened. They are with an interloping deed. There's not going to be a chain of title to this land in the state of Florida, and I will do another video on where they came in with the interloping deed on this particular section.